Every town has a dark side, and some secrets are buried so deep beneath the surface that by the time anyone finds them, it is already far too late. Come the summer of 1969, every newsroom across Michigan had fallen into the same grim routine. Another young woman, missing, another body, discovered days later, another murder, absolutely brutal, with no suspect in sight. In just a 2-year span, 7 young women were murdered, their bodies discarded with a cruelty that suggested whoever was doing this felt nothing at all except pure exhilaration. This is the true story of the Michigan murders.
In 1969, the Vietnam War was raging overseas. The civil rights movement was reshaping the country. And right here in the middle of it all, life in the college towns of Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor was humming along the way it always had. Students packed the sidewalks. Motorcycles lined the curbs. On any warm evening, you could find young people hitchhiking, wandering, trusting the world around them, the way a young person does when nothing bad has ever happened to them. Eastern Michigan University and the University of Michigan, Hochschule, sat just a few miles apart. Together, they gave this corner of the state a kind of easy youthful energy. On the warm evening of July 9th, a 19-year-old accounting student named Laura Hensley decided to walk home from campus. Laura was a good student, the kind who never missed Sunday Mass and called her parents every single week. When her roommate filed a missing persons report the following morning, police weren't exactly hitting the panic button. Laura was an adult, a college student. People like her took off all the time in the free-loving 60s. Maybe she went on a spontaneous road trip. Maybe she met someone. Those were the simplest explanations. So police went in that direction. The pathologist confirmed she had been severely beaten before she died, and evidence at the scene suggested the killer had returned multiple times over the weeks. Police logged the description from the funeral director. Good-looking, dark hair, early 20s, driving an old blue-gray Chevrolet, the same kind of car that had been circling Laura the night she vanished. They filed it away as a morbid curiosity and moved on.
There was nothing about that walk that should have been dangerous, but a neighbor watching from outside noticed something that didn't sit right. It was a blue-gray Chevrolet circling the block, slow, deliberate, and each time it passed Laura, the driver, leaned out and called to her. She shook her head and kept walking. He came around again. She refused again. The neighbor thought about stepping in, but hesitated. And then Laura turned a corner and was gone. For good, because no one would ever see her alive again. 4 weeks passed. 4 long, silent weeks, before a couple of teenage boys stumbled across what was left of her, near an abandoned farmhouse in Superior Township. Laura had been stabbed roughly 30 times. Her feet had been severed above the ankles. All 5 fingers removed from one hand, the other hand severed from the forearm down. None of those removed parts were ever found. But the detail that really stood out to investigators was evidence suggesting the killer had come back multiple times. Over the weeks, her body had been lying there. Someone had been returning to it, moving it, revisiting what he had done. That takes a certain type of psychopath. A young man showed up at the funeral, claiming to be a family friend, and he had a peculiar request. He asked the funeral director if he could take a photograph of Laura in that casket, said her parents wanted a keepsake. When the director told him no, the man pushed harder. Couldn't they just fix her up enough for one picture? After being turned away a second time, he walked out without another word. They had no idea the killer had just shown up to admire his own work.
Almost a full year went by. The investigation into Laura's murder had gone completely cold. On the evening of June 30th, 1968, 20-year-old Sandra Myers stepped out of her apartment on Emmett Street. She wanted to visit her boyfriend in Ann Arbor. Her roommate walked with her down to the bus stop. Sandra missed her bus, and instead of waiting for the next one, she decided to hitchhike. Police tracked down and cleared more than 150 people across Michigan who owned red and black vehicles. They sketched a composite of the driver and plastered it across campus. By August, they had absolutely nothing. 2 witnesses came forward saying they had seen Sandra walking with a male student along Emmett Street. Both thought the man looked like Daniel Mercer, an EMU student who lived directly across the street from Sandra. Police brought him in. He denied knowing Sandra, gave an alibi. Investigators took him at his word, never verified it, and let him walk.
Sandra looked back at her roommate, uncertain, almost asking for permission. Her roommate tried to talk her out of it, but Sandra got in anyway, calling back that she'd phone when she got there safely. That call never came. Construction workers found her body 5 days later. She'd been stabbed 25 times. Her throat had been sliced so deeply, the knife scraped against bone. And whoever did this had tied her own miniskirt around her neck. The killer had kept her somewhere before dumping her, stored, hidden like an object.
On March 20th, 23-year-old Rachel Voss, a University of Michigan law student, penned a handwritten note to a campus bulletin board. She needed a ride home to Muskegon. She was engaged, planning to move to New York City, a whole bright future in front of her. Her fully clothed body was found the next morning on top of a grave in Denton Cemetery. She had been shot twice in the head with a small caliber pistol, then strangled with a nylon stocking that didn't belong to her. A copy of the novel Catch-22 had been placed beside her body. Investigators found out Rachel had tried to call a student named David Johnson, believing he had offered her a ride. But Johnson said he never responded to her message. He had a solid alibi. Somebody had been impersonating him. Whoever answered that note knew exactly what they were doing.
What had been done to Christine represented an escalation so severe that a detective who had worked homicides for 30 years said it was the worst thing he had ever seen in his entire career. Christine had been tortured. The killer used her own shirt to muffle her screams while he beat her. Her skull was fractured, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, she fought back. Blood at the scene suggested she actually broke free and tried to run, but she didn't make it far enough. Less than a month later, 13-year-old Amy Cole was almost home, 5 blocks away, but never made it. A week after her body was found, a detective went back to the abandoned farmhouse and found a piece of Amy's blouse and, next to it, a gold earring. That had belonged to Christine Ruiz. The killer had gone back, He left those items there deliberately, like trophies arranged in a place only he knew about. And then on May 13th, someone burned that farmhouse to the ground. When firefighters went through what was left, they found 5 lilac flowers lined up in the driveway, one for each victim.
By June of 1969, this once calm college town had completely unraveled. Women were carrying knives and tear gas. Nobody went anywhere alone. Even in the summer heat, the windows stayed locked. At this point, police had worked through more than 1,000 suspects and 800 tips and were no closer to an arrest than the day Laura Hensley's body was found 2 years earlier. On June 8th, 21-year-old Nina Harlow was seen leaving a party on the back of a motorcycle. 3 days after that, her body turned up in a field. She had been stabbed, her throat sliced, and shot in the head. She also had a bullet wound through her thumb from when she raised her hand trying to protect her face. The gun changed everything. Were they even sure all these murders were connected? Was this one man or multiple killers operating in the same area? The sheriff went in front of reporters. He told them the killer was still out there because of luck, not because police weren't working hard enough. He promised they'd get him eventually. Behind closed doors, though, investigators were running out of road.
Things got so desperate that on July 21st, the community brought in a Dutch psychic named Peter Vander. He walked investigators to the precise location where each body had been found. He revealed details about the murders that had never been made public. And then he made one final prediction. The killer would strike again very soon. Just 2 days later, 18-year-old Katie Brennan walked into a wig shop in downtown Ypsilanti. While she was browsing, she noticed a young man waiting outside on a blue Triumph motorcycle, short, dark hair, striped sweater, just sitting there. And Katie turned to the shop owner and said she was doing 2 foolish things that day, buying a wig and accepting a ride from a stranger. She laughed and said she was either the bravest or the stupidest girl alive. The shop owner looked out the window. The moment she did, the man turned his head away. Katie walked out, climbed on the back of that bike, and 3 days later, her body was found near the Huron River. When investigators examined the evidence, what they found inside would finally break the case wide open. 509 individual human hair clippings, each one less than 3/8 of an inch long, mostly blonde, carefully cut. Katie's hair was dark brown. Those hairs had come from somewhere else entirely. And then came the moment that finally unraveled everything. The basement floor had been covered in fresh paint. Cleaning supplies were missing, and underneath that paint, what appeared to be blood. The Kellerman children were all blonde. Their hair had been cut in that basement just before the family left for vacation. The clippings swept into neat little piles. Those same clippings, tiny, blonde, less than 3/8 of an inch long, were a precise forensic match to the hairs found on Katie's body. Katie had been in that basement, and Daniel Mercer had taken her there, and then tried to paint over what he had done.
Investigators brought the shop owner in and showed her a photo lineup. She pointed to one picture without even hesitating. A neighbor confirmed it. Then another witness. then another. By the end, 7 separate people had placed the same man outside that wig shop on the day Katie got on that motorcycle. 3 other women came forward saying he had tried to pick them up before Katie had said yes. His name was Daniel Mercer. On paper, Daniel looked exactly like the kind of guy you'd want your daughter to bring home: an education student, former high school football captain, handsome, charming, easy with people. His fraternity had kicked him out for stealing. He had a vicious temper that frightened people. At work, he unsettled co-workers by describing the victim's injuries in graphic detail, claiming his uncle fed him inside information. The more investigators dug, the more Mercer kept appearing at the edges of every single case. He had worked directly across from where one victim lived. He dated someone whose apartment was right next to another victim's home. When police brought him in for questioning early on, he refused a lie detector test. On July 30th, 1969, police finally arrested Daniel Mercer. The trial began in 1970. Even though investigators privately believed Mercer was responsible for all 7 deaths, they only charged him with Katie's murder. The evidence in the other cases simply wasn't strong enough, and they needed one conviction. In court, the shop owner pointed straight at him. Forensic experts explained that the hair match wasn't a coincidence. The odds of those clippings appearing in 2 separate locations by accident were essentially 0. It was the first case in the nation where forensic hair analysis had been used to convict a killer. Groundbreaking. Mercer sat through all of it and said nothing. He didn't flinch when the verdict was read, even as his own family wept around him. He was sentenced to life in prison, later changed his name, and has been behind bars for over 50 years. But here is one last thing to leave you with. Sandra Myers, the second victim, was last seen getting into a car with 3 young men. One of those men was Mercer's own roommate. What the roommate told police later was that Mercer had insisted on taking Sandra in his own car. The 2 of them got out together, and Mercer came back alone almost 3 hours later. He said he dropped her off. Police questioned Mercer. He gave them an alibi. They took him at his word and never checked it.
If they had just checked that alibi, Katie Brennan might have gone to that wig shop and come home safe. Amy Cole might have made it down those railroad tracks. Nina Harlow might have made it home from that party. Instead, that case went cold. The murders continued, and 6 more women never came home. Every town has a dark side, and sometimes the darkest part of it is hiding in plain sight, right next door, right across the street, smiling at you like everything is fine.